All right, folks, welcome back to the Gateway Defense Podcast. It has been a while, but it is good to be back and recording for you guys. As always, I'm your host, Brennan Brennick. Our guest today is Justin Anderson, our very own. Usually my co-host today, we're going to interview him, though, because he is a newly minted GrandMaster. I think there's going to be some really interesting stuff to talk about, kind of detailing his journey to GrandMaster. Obviously, GrandMaster is a class in USPSA. It's the highest class that you can get in the sport. So it's definitely a huge achievement. Huge congrats to Justin. But I think you guys are going to find this conversation super interesting. Hopefully take away some value to help you in your own shooting journeys. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Justin, how you doing, bro?
Couldn't be better.
Couldn't be better. That's a good answer. So let's just jump right into it. So you made GrandMaster. Let's see, right now, I know you're not supposed to date your podcast, but right now it's Wednesday, July 24th. That we're recording this. We'll probably put this up before the end of the week. And you made GrandMaster when?
Last week
It went official. So about a week and a half ago or so, you shot a match, put up the score that you needed to, and then exactly last week, exactly 7 days ago from today, that went into effect officially on your classification record, right? So you're sitting at a 95%, I assume. Yep. 95 point something.
Sweet. Yeah, 95.05.
Listen, any way you can get it in there is good to go. So you can't lose the GM status, which is probably pros and cons, but for better or worse, you're there finally. Now, you have been performing as an M-class shooter, master class shooter for a long time. Really quick, just give everybody a quick rundown of the classifications in USPSA, if you don't mind, just so everybody's on the same page, and just kind of give people some context.
Yeah, so you have unclassified. You need at least 6 classifiers on your record in order for you to actually be classified. So that's the letter U. If you ever see that, it's unclassified. And then you have D class, starting from the bottom, D class, C class, B class, A class, M class, which is master, and then GM, which is GrandMaster.
Okay. Yeah, very good. So I think I know GrandMaster is 95% or higher. M class is 85 to 95. A class is 75 to 85. B class, I believe, is 60 to 75.
Yep, 15%. Yep.
And C class then would be 50 to 60. And then D class is 40 and under, I believe.
I'm pretty sure.
It kind of gives you a way to kind of measure yourself against everybody in the sport. Most people in the sport, if you've been shooting for any length of time, are classified. And so it kind of gives you an idea of kind of where you stack up. So I think the best way to start talking about this is just tell us about kind of your background in USPSA. Where did it start? When did you start shooting matches? Like, what was kind of the progression? Because you haven't been shooting USPSA all that long.
Yeah, no. So started shooting USPSA in 2020, so 4.5 years ago. I've only shot 48 or 49 matches as of right now. First match was January of 2020. We actually shot our first match within like 2 weeks of each other, being across the country. So that's kind of funny. Started off in production division. First classified as a B class. And then in late 2021, I would say early 2021, I switched to carry optics, and then classified as A class first in carry optics. And then late 2021, made M class in carry optics, and then just recently made GM in carry optics.
Okay. So the longest you were in any particular class was master then?
Yep. Yeah, like 2 years ish.
And everything else was about a year or less.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So what is, tell me about kind of the progression of the skills, the training, what it takes maybe to go from, let's say that B class level, because I think, because you were already a good shooter when you started USPSA, And I think a lot of guys who start in USPSA, if they're a pretty good shooter, maybe come in at C, but very quickly are kind of a B class shooter, right? And then as they start learning the game, they a lot of them make A without too much problem. But then M is usually a push for most guys to figure that out, because you do have to understand the game at a little bit higher level, usually at least to perform like an M, and definitely to classify as M class consistently. I think that's like a new challenge for people, just to be that consistent over the series of classifiers. And then of course GM is a whole nother challenge in and of itself. So maybe kind of talk through the way you approached it, or the differences in each of those classes, at least from your perspective.
Yeah. So yeah, started off in production.
Wait.
That was
Why did you start in production, by the way?
because I didn't shoot red dots yet.
Okay.
So I started off.
Which is only 4 years ago, right?
I know.
Wow.
Well, actually, no. I've only been shooting a dot for 3 years, bro. 3.5.
Dang.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm almost a FUD.
Yeah, that's right. Because your Glock 17, which you shot for a long time, which is what you started with in production, right?
Yep.
You like had to send that out and get it milled for a dot, right?
Yep. This gun right here.
Yep.
Yep. This was a bone stock 17 without the slide work and the dot, and that's what I shot in production at first.
Okay. So you started in
Yeah.
production because it was the gun that you had, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Very good. Continue.
Yeah, and I had been training for probably like 2 years prior. Like seriously training. Had a lot of non-competitive influences, like shooting influences back then. So my goals or my aspirations weren't as high as they should have been, I think. We'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, started off in production because that's just what I had. I didn't modify hardly any of my gear. I already had a belt set up. I may have bought like a cheap, like $30 or $40 competition belt, just because I didn't want to show up in like a full battle belt rig, like I was like, I don't really want to do that. Because I'm still like a civilian, didn't want to be like the tactical Timmy at a match. So I think I bought a competitive belt for like $30 or something, and just threw all my battle belt accessories on that. But yeah, start off as B class. The thing about B class, and I'd love your opinion here as well, because for those of you listening, may not know, Brennan's also a masterclass shooter, so Brennan knows arguably even more about the sport than I do. But I'd be curious to know your thoughts on this as well. But I think B class, a lot of people that are class B class, I think are pretty solid shooters, right? Like I've heard a lot of people say that like a lot of cops that train pretty seriously classify as B class, right? So like the higher level cops. I think being a B class shooter, typically it's someone that can hit what they're aiming at without too much trouble, right? Like they don't
Agreed.
struggle with accuracy. They're not shooting low left all the time, right? Like they can hit an A zone on demand at 10 yards, like at any point, right?
Yes.
Maybe they can even do a sub 2-second bill drill, maybe, or 2.5 bill drill, right? Like, so they understand recoil control. They probably have a pretty solid understanding of their grip, blah, blah, blah. But what they lack typically is match experience, stage planning, and speed, in my opinion. Those are like the three major things that I think B class shooters are lacking. And obviously you could say accuracy too, because a lot of times you'll see like no shoots and mics and things like that. But that's kind of where I think the B class level people fall. And in my opinion, if you shoot USPSA for the first time and you classify as B class, I think that's pretty good. Personally,
I
I think
agree.
A class is like a good standard to shoot for. I think you should shoot for A, but
Yes.
if you classify as B, like do not be ashamed, because that's an accomplishment in and of itself, because you are literally better than pretty much all the cops out there that are, sworn to protect you. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so a good standard to shoot for.
I think that's solid. I think you're right on. So, obviously, the whole sport is measured speed and accuracy, so it's always a balance. So you could be a really accurate shooter, you could be a really fast shooter. Like our friend Gavin. Is Gavin A class?
I believe so. Yeah, pretty sure.
Yeah, I think he's A class. He could
Yep.
probably make M pretty easily if he would ever practice. So, Gavin, if you're watching this, go practice. So, but Gavin, like, he's really fast. Like,
Yeah.
he is just as fast as like any masterclass guy out there. But he could definitely dial in his accuracy a little bit, right? And it's not that he's an inaccurate shooter, but when he goes at that speed, there's some accuracy issues.
Mhm.
So I think with B class, the easiest way to look at it, like you were saying, is like those cops. Great example, come into the sport and they're just like, okay, I'm just going to shoot like all alphas, and they can. And so then
Yep.
they go shoot their classifier. They're shooting all alphas, and it's pretty consistent of a performance. They're
Yep.
not going that fast, but they're just definitely going at a pace that they can shoot all alphas, which is a pretty solid like skill level. And yeah, that's exactly what they run into. And I think when we see them kind of throwing a lot of mics or hitting no shoots, that's just because they're trying to push the speed on stuff, and they're just not ready for it.
Yep.
That's definitely what I see at like kind of the C and B class level for sure.
Mhm.
That's a
Yeah.
good point. So so B class, that's interesting. I also started B class shooting open, actually. So I was shooting my little carry gun. Do I have this thing?
Oh, look at
This
that.
is my open gun. So obviously not an ideal open gun, but it's just an M&P 2.0 compact with an Apex trigger, a Parker Mountain single port comp on there, and a tiny little Floyd's magwell, which doesn't even really count as a magwell in my opinion. Not an open division anyways. It's pretty
That's it.
solid for EDC, but
That's an
this is a
Instagram open
dude.
gun.
This is a terrible open gun. So great carry gun, terrible open gun. So yeah, I classified in B open minor. I just went and I think I shot 2 matches, and then I shot a classifier match, and that's how I got that. But then I switched to carry optics like right away. So how many matches did you shoot in production before you switched to carry optics? Do you know?
Now, before we get to that, though, people have to
Okay.
understand it's a lot harder to make B class in open minor than it is in production. So Brendan was a better shooter than me when he
Okay.
started
Well,
USPSA.
maybe. I don't know. There were some easy classifiers that I shot. So
Uh,
I shot lightning and thunder for one of them. So
oh, okay. Well,
yeah, right.
I'm sorry. What was
So
the
how
question?
many matches did you shoot in carry or in production before you switched to carry optics? Do you think was it like less than 10?
It was probably around 10 or 12. I also
Really?
shot my first major. It was the Wisconsin sectional in B class or in production as well. But yeah, it was probably like 12 matches.
Okay. Wow. So actually pretty significant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe 10.
I think open, I maybe shot like 5 matches maybe total, right?
Okay.
Or less. So not very much. So then you switch over to carry optics, and then how long was it doing that? And what was the main, obviously the difference between carry optics and production for those of you who might not know. So production is you're pretty much just shooting a stock gun. No red dot, no magwell. You're limited to, back then you're limited to 10 rounds. Now it's 15, I think.
Yep.
Back then you're limited to 10 rounds, so lots of reloads. But essentially, like if you get a non-optic ready gun or an optic ready gun that you don't put a dot on and you add nothing to it, that's all you can do. Okay, I think you can change the trigger out maybe,
Yep.
and maybe some slide cuts, but you can't do anything else. So you switch to carry optics, which is essentially production plus a slide ride red dot, but pretty much nothing else. And then I think when we started, there were some different gear requirements going on. Now the gear requirements are different, but pretty much it was just you add a dot to the production gun, and you get more capacity in your mags, right?
Yep.
So what did you feel like was the biggest difference switching over to CO then?
Yeah. So when I switched over to carry optics, I immediately classed as A class. And personally, I don't believe I was that much better of a shooter, but just simply using a dot is so much
Mm-hmm.
easier. It just naturally enhanced my skill.
Yeah,
That's honestly how I feel. That's how I think it went.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
What did
everything's
you
just
find
easier
to
with a dot.
be okay? So did you felt like it was an easier division, just be
Yeah,
or at least just easier to shoot the carry optics gun?
yeah, I would say it's just easier to shoot with a dot than with irons. I
Yeah.
specifically remember classifiers, some classifiers that are at like that 12 to 15 yard mark.
Yes.
And with irons, I always struggled. I would always tag no shoots or maybe throw a mic into a hardcover. Always, every single time. And I do believe that that was partially a skill issue. But as
Hmm.
soon as I got a dot, like I didn't do that kind of stuff anymore, just because I could see way more what's going on at 15 yards. And that's something we've talked about a lot. That's where
Hmm.
the benefits of like a red dot really start to show, is when you're at that 15, 25, yard distance.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So, and then you were in A class. You were A class when I met you, I believe.
Mhm.
We were both A class. And then, so talk about the A class level shooter and kind of where you were, and then what the progression looked like getting to M from A.
Yeah. So during my time as A class, I actually don't remember a whole lot because that period of my life, I was not able to shoot very many matches.
Okay.
At the time, I was running a company. And so I had a lot of time dedicated to or a lot of time and money dedicated to other resources.
Yep.
And, I started growing my family and kind of switching jobs at that time too. So I was not shooting a ton of matches at that point. Um, However, I was able to shoot on my own, like practice a lot on my own,
Hmm.
and that helped tremendously. So I would say from the year, so yeah, it was about a full year of shooting carry optics until I made M class. So I started shooting carry optics in like early 2021 and then made M in November of 2021. So from January to November, like I said, I didn't shoot very many matches, maybe like a couple, but it was like one every other month, if that. But I was
Hmm.
doing a lot of training on my own time, learning some stuff. I know you and I had really picked up our conversations on things, talking a lot more training related things, and I started learning a lot more about like the high level competition shooters. Started finding guys like JJ, Max Michelle, Mason Lane, Hwansa Kim, those kind of guys that I really started paying attention to and learning these things from.
Yeah.
um, and so I would say during that A class time, I was starting to figure some things out in my own practice. And I would say the biggest thing that I was figuring out was speed,
Mm.
mechanic speed, shooting speed, transition speed, movement speed, like everything. Like in my mind, I'm just like, I have to go faster.
Hmm.
Shout out to good buddy of mine, good buddy of ours, local GM here, Eric Camps. He was a huge influence on me when I first started. And I specifically remember one match that he beat me probably by like, I want to say it was over 20 seconds. It was like 22 or 24 seconds throughout the whole like 6 stage match.
Wow.
And I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, Eric is a GM. I'm not, but that's insane. Like, that's literally like 4 seconds per stage that he has on me. And I feel like I'm going fast, right? Like, you always feel
Right.
like you're going super fast till you watch the footage and you're like, oh my gosh, like,
Tell me
why
about
were
it.
you walking? you know?
Why were you going so
Um,
slow on purpose?
I know, right? Exactly. Um, Slow down and get your hits, right?
Yeah. Right.
Um, so going fast, ramping up the speed was like my main priority of 2021.
Okay.
Um, I wasn't shooting a whole lot. That was a year after COVID. Ammo prices were still sky high at that point.
Hmm.
9 mil was still like 50, 60 cents a round. So I
Those are
wasn't
bad
shooting
times.
that much, but I was still shooting probably like 200 or 300 rounds a month in practice.
Okay. Not bad.
Um, yeah. And I just remember pushing like my bill drill times. Man, one drill that I shot all the time was static target to static target. And I remember like trying to get my split time, my movement split time down so low and still maintain like Alpha Charlie.
So
And
you're
so,
running from position to position
yep,
and
yep,
shooting just one target? Yep.
exactly. Yep.
Okay, great.
And and I did that just over and over and over. And then I would do like a triangle. So then I would do like position, position, run backward, right? And that was where I started to figure out the movement and like the movement piece and entries and exits.
Yeah.
Back then, if you go back and watch my match videos, I was super hard into like leaning exits, like really over dramatized leaning exits. And I would throw deltas and mics all over the place doing those, but I was gaining a lot of speed, right? Because I was going as fast as I could, you know?
Right.
And so that kind of segues into how I made M. I personally believe that I attribute a lot of my, I guess the reason why I made M was mostly due to just speed without
Hmm.
throwing like an atrocious amount of mics or no shoots, right? But like deltas, a mic every now and then, you can get away with that at an M class level, in my opinion.
Lots of Charlies.
Yes, lots of you don't even think about Charlies. Like as an M class shooter,
Charlies are just good.
especially me, like I didn't even care. I'm just like, oh, no deltas, sweet. It was 15 Charlies, but I don't care.
Uh,
Um,
Charlies are free.
yeah, exactly. As long as I'm going fast, you know. Um, and so then I remember starting to shoot a few more matches and shooting with air camps. I started to see my times level out a little bit more closer to his, and I was like, okay, now I'm figuring this out. The time is there, but then Eric's not shooting mics and no shoots. So then I was like, okay. So in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion, that's kind of that's how you distinguish M's and GMs is M's go really fast and they cowboy it, but they don't shoot great points. GMs shoot the same level of speed or faster and don't
Yep.
drop the points. That's
Exactly.
like I think if I could summarize those in the
Mm-hmm.
easiest way possible, that's how I would do it. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree. And I
Yeah.
think when we were at that level, A class, I was A class for let's see, 2020. Yeah, middle of 2020 to I think I made M class shortly after you, so a little over a year in A class. And I remember talking to you about that, like, what is the difference between GMs? Because we'd watch them and it was like, I feel like I can go that fast, right? And
Yep.
especially once we made M, like we've had this conversation for literally 2 years now. Like I can definitely shoot as fast as that guy, right? Or
Yep.
faster, or my mechanics are better. My transitions are just as good. He's not splitting the gun much faster than me, maybe even slower than me sometimes. But it was the points that definitely changes things.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we really had boiled it down to points. We were just like, they don't make mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it was like, I don't think we were basing everything off of, alphas. It was, oh, wow, they go really fast and don't make mistakes. Let me go really fast and try to make fewer mistakes instead of just going, don't try to avoid mistakes, just focus on shooting alphas, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's where you and I have been, what you and I have been pushing super hard in the training lately is like only shoot alphas, right?
Yep.
But of course, not giving up the speed element at all. So yeah, really cool. So the A class to M class, major jump there is speed. Do you think that's the key for most folks in A class, or do you see a lot of people kind of struggling with different things in that B to A, trying to make that jump to M?
Yeah, I would say that's the biggest thing. But one thing I do still see is stage planning.
Yes,
I personally see a huge gap in stage planning with A class shooters
I
still.
agree.
Like you'll still see like FTSAs with A class shooters, and they're like, "Oh, you've got to be kidding me!" It's like, dude, you can't make those mistakes if you want to be an M class shooter.
I agree.
And it's one thing to go to nationals, have an FTSA on a like super technical stage. That's one thing, but I'm talking about your locals, 5-6 stage match, right?
Yep.
Simple stages like 10 targets, 8 targets, 12 targets. You should not be having FTSAs. You absolutely should not. But also, I think A class shooters. I think A class shooters have the confidence of M class shooters, but don't have
Yeah.
the skill yet, right? So they'll do a
Interesting.
stage plan
Okay.
that they'll look at M's and GMs and they'll be like, I could do that, and so then they
Yeah,
do it, but then they can't handle that. That sounds
I
bad or
totally
mean to
agree.
say that, but
No, I see that all the time. So I see that on shooting on the move for people, right? So they'll see
yes,
something, maybe like you're walking through your stage and they just kind of like come up and ask you, be like, hey, man, are you going to shoot those targets on the move? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Right.
Yep.
And like I try to be super confident with my stage planning because it's been a weakness for me for a very long time. And so now I'm trying to like delete that weakness by being very confident about it, and also learning that stage plans don't matter as much as people think. But I'll be like, yes, absolutely, I'm going to take those those targets on the move, and they'll be like, oh, okay, right. And then you'll hear them talking to other people, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to take those on the move. And then they get up to it, and they're like trying to shoot on the move, and they're like, whoa, and it's very difficult, so they stop and they
Yep.
just shoot static. Right.
Yep.
I see that a lot, like, or that type of thing where it's like, oh, I'm going to do this, and then it didn't actually work out, and then they have to stop. They have to change their stage plan mid stage, and then I don't know, things usually go kind of screwy after that.
Yep. Yeah, because when they know when they're not executing that stage to a GM level, like they know it midway through,
Yep.
they're like, oh crap, I should not be taking this 15-yard, partial on the move. So then, they
Right.
stop, and their mind just kind of gets jumbled. So yeah, I would say those are the big things that I see in A class.
Yeah.
And then obviously like just kind of the other stuff too, like penalties, foot faults, maybe, FTSAs, and then also like no shoots. Like in my opinion, a no shoot, to me, the no shoot territory should fall off at like that A class level, in my opinion. And
Yeah.
and here's why I say that is because it was a big
doesn't
thing for
though.
me.
It
What was
doesn't
that?
though.
It
It doesn't
doesn't.
though. A lot of M's have like at least one no shoot per match.
Yeah. Yep. And yeah, so it's interesting. So for my personal journey, when I was shooting production, I would shoot at least like 3 no shoots per match. It was so bad. And I really think it was because I was pushing into the gun so much to
Yeah.
get it to return, right? Like
Totally.
that typical recoil push in.
Yep.
So tag no shoots all the time. When I switched to carry optics, I don't know what it was, but it was like a switch in my brain that I was like, I cannot shoot no shoots anymore. It is ridiculous. It's super irritating. It's unnecessary because all you have to do is, like, in my opinion, is just like hit what you're aiming at, right? And not think about it so much.
Yeah. And it's easy to see where the bullet's going to go too, because right, shiny red thing, if it's touching the white, then like bad, right?
Exactly. Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. When I was shooting production with irons, like obviously I was a much less experienced shooter back then, but I would see the no shoots and I'm like, that wasn't a no shoot. I did not call that. Like, where did that come from? So
Right.
it was always a surprise, which is super irritating. And so, so my big focus, I specifically remember in 2021, my huge focus was to not plug no shoots. No matter how fast I wanted to go, like do not shoot no shoots. And I was pretty successful at that because I would throw no shoots up in my training. It's pretty funny. The training I had in 2021 to make M was actually pretty good training looking back. I wasn't really recording much of it. And I did it so I did it like once a month, if that. Sometimes not even once a month, but I would set up like, a 1 or 2 position like stage, and I would just throw no shoots up because I'm like, I can't plug a no shoot. So anyways, but yeah, that's where I see like the A class kind of skill levels start to cap out.
So question about stage planning. This is fun. So obviously, like to anybody listening, this could easily maybe come off as like, oh, like, 2 better shooters, like making fun of people who aren't as good at shooting them. Like, that's not what we're trying to do at all. But I think this is only for growth because both Justin and I have been in the exact position of like A class and B class as well. Right. And like, I'm still M class. Justin made G, like I'm not even there yet. Right. So we're like, we've been there, done that, lived this, lifestyle of working up through all the classifications. Right. So something I see a lot is, and this is totally off script, but something I see a lot at matches is like guys who, we talked about, they'll copy somebody else's stage plan, but they're not ready for that yet because the skills involved to execute that stage plan are beyond them. Right. So what do you think about guys just in general copying like a GM or an M guy, like their stage plans? Like in general, because stage planning is a big weakness for a lot of lower class shooters. And so is that a good idea? is that a good way to figure out stage planning? Because I also will see, and I could think of like the last match that I shot, guys would look at, my stage plan, or maybe they'd look at your stage plan. We usually have different stage plans, which is cool, right? And they'll look at that, and they'll be like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm just going to do the thing that makes the most sense for me. And while I think that is a good, that's not a bad kind of stance. At the same time, like, sometimes I'd be like, bro, you were going to shoot this 8 seconds slower than me, though. Even if I shoot it slow, right? Like, not the trigger pulling, not the running. Like, I'm not very athletic, right? But like, just by doing this plan where you go here and here and here and here versus my plan doing it this way, you're just going to shoot it like 5 to 8 seconds slower than me, and bada bing, bada boom, 8 seconds slower than me, right? And I'm just kind of like, ah. So where do you think the that line is where, is it helpful to copy somebody else's stage plan, or is it not helpful? Because I definitely think, I, like, for instance, last year at nationals, I copied other people's stage plans quite a bit, and let myself be influenced by other better shooters on the squad, and tried other stuff that I just should not have been trying, because it just did not work out for me, because, I was trying to do things that were outside my skill level. So what do you think about all that?
Yeah, I would say it's yes and no.
Okay.
And you kind of already covered some of that as to why, but I agree. I think if you're an M class shooter, you should be copying GM's stage plans for the most part, or at least taking note of them, right?
Okay.
Because GMs are going to look at a stage and they're going to typically exploit their strengths, but still like be consistent enough. Most GMs, or at least high level GMs, are not going to do super risky things. Yeah. So as an M class shooter, I think you should really take note of it. Maybe at a match, maybe at a local match, try to copy them, which we can start getting into, whether you should use matches for practice or not. But at local matches, copy GM stage plans, see how it works out for you, see what they're doing. But for sure, record GM stage plans. Like, when GMs in your squad are shooting, record them and take note of them. If you choose to do a different stage plan, that's fine, but compare and understand like why they did that. Because I do agree, there are definitely stage plans that like some M's, but like even A class shooters just will not be able to execute to that level, and it'll be a total disaster. But then on the other hand, like you said, sometimes you see an A class or a B class shooter stage plan, and you're like, dude, I don't want to be, rude here, but like, that is literally the worst stage plan I can think of. Or that's like the slowest stage plan I can think of. Like, you should be cutting across here, taking these, 3-yard targets on the move. Like, you should be doing those kind of things.
Right.
But to me, I think so. I'm gonna get a little spicy here. You said we can get spicy, so I'm gonna
Let's
get
get
spicy.
spicy. Let's
I
do it.
think the standard for M class should be way higher than it is. And so that's why I
Explain.
think that M's should be doing more GM stuff. When I look back at the 2.5 years that I was an M, I was not doing GM stuff.
Definitely not. Right.
Yep. So, and we've talked about this a lot. There's a pretty big disparity of M class level shooters. Like, you may have one guy that's M class that's like always placing with the G's, always up there with the G's, winning, or at least placing really high at major matches. And then you have the M class guys that it's like, bro, how many reshoots did you do to make M? Right.
Yeah. Right.
So, and I personally think that like people get away with that because M is, it's a bigger, right? It's a wider range. And so I personally think within the training world, M is like the goal for a lot of guys. And that's great. But like, I think the standard of M should be a little higher than what it is. Like, we've talked about that a good bit, but, yeah, it's kind of a long answer to that, but I would say it's a yes and no. But for sure, no matter what stage you're at, definitely take note of their stage plans and find similarities, and take note of like, the things that they do throughout an entire match. That's why we tell people all the time, if you're gonna go shoot a match, squad with GMs or
Yeah.
M's,
Right.
both of them. Like,
Yep.
always squad with the best guys.
Yep. I totally agree. And I think, kind of maybe on a more technical level, we can go this direction for a minute. So, what I would say is, okay, so I'll just throw something out there when I'll just compare it for me, right? So I'll look at somebody else's stage plan, right? And let's just compare you and me, right? So you'll have a stage plan. Maybe you say, um, I'm gonna do, X stage plan. And I'm like, well, I was thinking about doing Y stage plan, right? And we'll discuss, do you think that's faster? And you'll be like, yeah, I think it's faster. Or sometimes it'll be like, no, I think it's, about a horse a piece, but I'm going to do this because I feel like this is less risky, or I would rather do, a long distance shot than a shooting on the move shot or something like that. Right. And we'll kind of discuss those things.
Hmm.
But what I will look for is, like, sometimes I will copy somebody else's stage plan because I'm just like, I think that's better. Right.
Hmm.
Sometimes it'll be, I think it's about 50-50. Like, I think it's, six one way, half a dozen another. I'm going to try this other person's stage plan because I kind of want to push myself. I want to try something different. And just try to start thinking in a different way, because you can definitely fall into the trap of planning stages the same way all the time, kind of,
Hmm.
where it's kind of like you almost have like a template and you see a
Yep.
stage and you're like, oh, then I'll just shoot it like this. Right.
Hmm.
Like, for instance, like a lot of the ones where you start, up range and you have to run, or you start down range, you have to run up range right off the start, right? Where you draw and you go back to back left corner, back right corner. Like, a lot of guys will just always go to the back left or always go to the back right,
Yep.
and that's a flaw in my opinion, right? You need to be open to doing, either. So
Sure.
when I look at that, I try to go, all right, so if I try Justin's stage plan, for instance, and I shoot it and something in it goes wrong, then that is something that I really need to take home to practice. So let's
Hmm.
say, like, you decide to, which this is kind of funny. It'd probably usually be the opposite for us, but, like, let's say you decide to take, these 3 targets from a really long distance, right? And I go, man, accuracy is not my strong suit. Right. But, like, let's say I would much rather just, like, run up there, and maybe I'm fast. Right. And so I'll look at that, and maybe I copy you, and, like, my hits are just trash. And so I go, oh man. So if I do that, like, that's not a total loss, especially if it's like a local match, because I can go, okay, like, this is something a GM is doing. I need to go home and I need to work on accuracy at distance. Like,
Yep.
man, that's something a GM is doing that I just cannot do. We've talked about it before. You shot with Ben Suzuki, I think
Hmm.
his name is.
Yep.
He's a GM, and you shot with him at Area 5, and you were saying something like he shoots partials, like, really aggressively, right?
Hmm.
And you took that away. I saw from Carry Optics Nationals this last year, I got to watch the Super Squad and Eric Graffel's squad shoot a lot, and stuff I was looking from them was like, they don't take risks until they have to, right? Whereas, like, I think a lot of M class guys are taking risks just to kind of explore.
Hmm.
Again, we can talk about matches as practice, if that's a good idea or not. But I was like, wow, like, these guys are all very consistently taking the easiest route possible. And they
Yep.
only push when it's absolutely necessary to gain a big advantage,
Hmm.
right? Whereas I think, like, M's a lot of times will push to gain a tiny advantage, right?
Hmm.
Like you were saying, like a leaning exit. Okay, well, what's the advantage there? About a half a second, right, on the stage. But what's the downside? Maybe you throw a Charlie or a Delta, right? And so,
Hmm.
boom, there goes. If you throw a Delta, boom, there goes your half second advantage, right? It's
Yep.
actually a wash now. So I think if you are going to copy people's stage plans, try it out sometimes, right? Especially if you ask their opinion and they're like, this is definitely a much faster way to do it. Somebody who's going to be a good, like, influencer mentor will also tell you, like, especially if they've seen you shoot, like, I don't know that I would do that if I were you, right? And they probably maybe give you, like, a little bit more simplistic stage plan, or maybe something that's less risky. But definitely pay attention to that. But if you copy them and find something that feels like it's out of your wheelhouse, like, that's what you really need to write down and take note of, because that's what you should go practice, because that's just, like, right there, they're handing it to you, like, here's a skill set that I can do that you can't do, right?
Hmm.
Like, boom, there's a huge difference right there. So anyways, again, long-winded answer there, but I think there's definitely some benefit to copying stuff. The difference, I would say, is at major matches where you're really trying to see where you stack up. Let's say you're a B class shooter and you're shooting, Area 5, which is our next match, and you really want to see, like, how do I stack up to all the other B and A class guys? I don't think that's the time to experiment around and try some crazy stage plans or some stuff that you would not normally do. That's where you need to just, do a stage plan that's well within your skill level and that you can execute. And that way you'll get a very good, realistic idea of where you stack up.
Yep.
So that's how I would approach it at majors. At locals, you can maybe experiment a little bit more. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do.
Cool.
It's interesting. Stage planning, it's very nuanced,
It is.
because it's really important until it's not, right?
True. Yeah.
We can get to that too, but like, yeah,
No,
we
yeah,
know that.
talk about that. So like, because you said like at B and A class, the stage planning is generally fairly weak.
Mhm.
And then at M, you start really figuring it out. And then high M and GM, they're back to making it as simple as possible and not really
Mhm.
caring what the stage plan is as long as they pick a good one.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, and, yeah, it's so interesting. So I'm a left-handed shooter, right?
Yep.
Wrong-handed.
Right.
So naturally, when I walk up to a stage, my brain just thinks about things a little bit differently. It's not as much as people may think. Everyone's always like, "Oh yeah, you're lefty. You're always going to run it opposite." I don't. I don't very often run it opposite of right-handed shooters. So
Yeah.
that's a total myth. I just want to bust that right now. It irritates me so much.
Yeah.
Guys are like, "Oh, why are you going that way? You're lefty." It's like, because I'm not an amateur. I don't know. Like, I can
Yeah.
reload without,
But like
anyways.
on a perfectly symmetrical stage, like you would probably rather shoot it right to left than left to right in
Correct.
general.
Yep.
Yep.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Um, so huge turning point, and we'll get to this. I'm sure we'll dive into this a little bit more detail. Huge turning point in my shooting, taking a class from Eric Raffel, the GOAT himself, in
Mm-hmm.
January of this year, 2024. Opened my eyes to a whole new world. And that class was stacked.
Yes, it was.
Sean Griffith, you, Donovan, Randall, um, um,
Dave Murphy,
Dave Murphy.
Buck Lawler.
Yep. And then
Um,
even
yeah, a
just
couple other guys.
even talking to Eric and kind of hearing how Eric would maybe do things too. I ran a different stage plan almost every stage than all of you guys did. And yet my stage plan was never the reason I was not in a good place, or was never the reason I didn't do well.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so eye-opening to me. Like that specific class, I'm looking at, national level shooter like Sean Griffith and Randall, and I'm shooting a different stage plan than these guys, and yet I might beat them on a stage. And I'm like, that's weird, but like it works. And then you start to hear Eric explain things, and you start to hear him break it down, and not very often did he say, "Well, your stage plan was wrong." Every once in a while, he would say, like, "Well, why did you do this? Like, it's too risky, whatever."
Yeah.
But and then something you and I have talked about a lot, and have noticed with some of these high level GMs is that when you get to a certain level, the stage plan doesn't matter quite as much as it does when you're like B or A class. So that's
Totally.
where that yeah. So that's where it's like, okay, if you're B class, A class, you should probably spend a good amount of time practicing your stage planning and working on your stage planning, refining it.
Mm-hmm.
But once you get to that M, maybe even I would say high M to GM level stage planning, at that point, if you're at that skill level, your experience will be there most likely, and stage planning now becomes a lot less of an important thing, in my opinion.
Yeah. Interesting. So, do you think that your stage planning? Okay, whatever. You've been in GM for like a week, but as you've
Right.
been getting closer to GM, like I think that and we've talked about this. I think you've been performing at a GM level for a couple months, right? Like in matches, right? Maybe 6 months at least, right? So do you think that your stage planning has changed as you've gotten to this last kind of most recent high level, or do you think like at a certain point you just kind of figured it out how to think about it and it's just like good to go at that point?
Um, Boy, it's a good question. I don't know. I don't think I'm really changing much.
Yeah.
If anything, if anything, I'm trying to learn. I guess I would say I am changing a little bit. I guess I would say I'm learning to not take as many risks.
Yes.
Um,
There you go.
yep, yep. Um,
Because
that's
taking
probably the
risks
biggest
is part
shift.
of figuring out how to go fast. Like,
Hmm.
or at least they're fairly connected. And
Yep.
the M class journey, like you said, big focus on speed.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that that's an okay progression because it really I think it's a good growing pain of like, okay, there's a season in which you're pushing speed, and when you reach that level of speed and you can consistently perform at that level of speed, asking you to just shoot all alpha or just get, 95% alpha, you're not going to go that much slower, right? Um uh I was on a thought there. I'll come back to it. But yeah, so oh yeah, Mark Smith. One of my favorite quotes from Mark Smith I've ever heard him say is, "You don't have to go fast when you are fast." And I think that when you inoculate yourself to that level of speed as an M class shooter,
Mm-hmm.
asking you to just dial it back a little bit to get more points is is good. Like I think it's a good way to do it, in my opinion. That's how
Yeah.
I did it.
It's easier to do that than to find some depth of speed that within you that you didn't know you had, right? And like that
Exactly.
is a much more difficult thing to attain. Yeah,
Exactly.
I totally agree. So for me, the stage planning thing has changed greatly. Just not in not in like, oh, my stage plans were bad before, but just in my confidence level. So like that's been a big thing that I think is going to carry me into the next level of shooting. And you and I have both, I think, been leveling up the last year or so for sure.
For sure.
Kind of neck and neck, right? Classifications aside, we've been working on a lot of the same things. And yeah, the confidence thing is big for me. Understanding that as long as you're being efficient, you're not overlooking something kind of egregious. You can run things differently. I watched a couple stages where like Jay Beal and Miriam Brantley. I'm sorry, Brantley Miriam. Gosh, Brantley and Jay were shooting specifically would shoot stages like quite a bit differently from the rest of their squad, and it would be like the same result, right?
Yep.
Or very close, competitive. Maybe they do great. Maybe they'd be right in the middle of the pack. But it was like, oh wow, okay, like you shot that completely opposite from everybody else. From Hetherington and Nils and Max Michelle, and it turned out great for you. So definitely just being confident that can that you can do it, and making sure you're not just overlooking something egregious is something that I think helps a lot at the higher levels. And that's something I definitely learned from Brantley. Cool. Okay. So let's get to some other questions. I've got some ones. Maybe we can kind of run through some of these pretty quick. We kind of already talked about what has changed in your training strategy. What is right now, what is your focus kind of going into each match? Let's say locals.
Yeah, locals, going into every local, I just wanna win. I just wanna beat you. That's my only focus. You and Donovan.
That's great. That's great.
Um, so going into locals, right now, the biggest thing that I'm working on, and I'm coining this term, is not cowboying it, not cowboying a match.
Okay.
Um,
Explain what that
so
means.
yes, so Cowboys just do whatever they want based on how they feel, not based on how they should do things or within a rule set or within a set of guidelines or standards. And
This is
so
discrimination against cowboys.
it is a little
Hate
bit.
speech.
Yes, it is a
Yeah.
little bit. And I'm okay with
Okay.
it, honestly,
All right.
because I live in Wisconsin. Um, so when you go to a local match and you have anywhere between 4 to 7 stages,
Yes.
as an M class shooter or a GM level shooter, you can get away with throwing way more points out the window because there's not enough stages for consistency to really matter that much.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not going to spoil Eric Rafel's hit factor rules, but let's just say if there were a specific set of rules you should abide by based on the stage, whether it be at a certain amount of points, certain amount of Charlies, deltas, whatever it may be. if you are held to those rules at a 15 to 20 stage match, however many points you give up per stage is going to be compounded because there's 15 stages, right?
Yep. Right.
But if you're at a 4 to 7 stage match, well, if I threw 1 or 2 Charlie more than I needed to, well, at the end of the day, that's still only 6 to 8 more Charlie than I needed to versus like
Mm-hmm.
14, right?
Yes.
So that's a huge thing. It's a huge thing for me in my shooting. And so when you go to a local and you do not shoot disciplined and you just cowboy it, you can win locals. You can
Mm-hmm.
perform very well. However, you are not able to really practice consistency, and you're not able to see the rewards or the benefits of consistency over over a 4 to 7 stage match. In my opinion, there obviously is a level of consistency, but not to that of a two-day match or a 10 to 15
Mm-hmm.
stage match, right?
Yeah.
So
Like you can win a local, let's say 6 stages. If you are like an M or a GM shooter, you could definitely win a local with 5 deltas, 3 mics and a no shoot. Like,
potentially, if you're fast
like
enough, yeah.
yeah, like I've seen that from guys. Like, oh man, he he had a couple stages were just really bad, and then he had like 3 stage wins.
Hmm.
Boom, there
Yep.
you go. Like he's probably going to win the match.
Yep. Exactly.
Right.
Because
Whereas at a
yeah.
major state, like if you're focusing on stage wins, like that's totally the wrong, focus.
Hmm. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Because if you look at if so, for instance, you and me, right? I go up to a stage at a local, and I think, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna send it. I'm okay with 6 to 8 Charlies. Like I'm fine with it, honestly.
Hmm.
So I send it. I'm maybe a second or two faster than you, but I throw 8 Charlies in the delta.
Hmm.
Eh, not great, but hey, I did it in like 9 seconds, right? And then you walk up to the stage and you're like, you know what? He gave up a lot of points. Like he literally just gave up 20 points, right?
Hmm.
I'm going to take advantage of that. And so you do. You go a second slower. So you're 3 seconds behind me, but then you only shoot 2 or 3 Charlie. Okay. Let's just say you have maybe 5% on me on that stage. Over a 4 to 7 stage match, that doesn't even matter.
Hmm.
Because if you were to do that on every stage, yeah, you would win. But the thing is, like, if you only do that 2 or 3 stages, you're probably not going to win. And
Agreed.
so, yep. Um, so yeah, when you understand that if you go into a local thinking, hey, I'm going to try and win this. I'm going to try and shoot really aggressive and not really hold yourself to a disciplined set of either standards or rules for yourself. You might be cheating yourself a little bit, which is why major matches and local matches, they're completely different animals, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yep. And so for me, to answer your question in 10 minutes, my goal going into local matches right now is to be very disciplined in shooting the points I need without giving up much speed, and to essentially treat every local like a major.
There
That's
it is.
that's my goal going into every local right now.
Cool. And has that been hard for you to make that
Yes.
switch mentally?
It's it's literally the hardest thing I've ever had to figure out because
Yeah.
a lot of it's mental. I believe that I possess a lot of the hard skill that I may ever need. There's definitely a lot of hard skill development I still need, but I think a majority of it is there. It's just how to apply it and where to use those skills in certain areas. And
Hmm.
so I know I can walk up. This was not the case a year ago or even 8 months ago, but I know I can walk up to any stage, most any stage, and shoot it all alpha. Like I know it's within my realm of skill to do that and probably still do it pretty fast. However, um, that may not be the best option, right? That may not
Correct.
be the best way to do it. I also know that I can shoot it probably faster than any other person at that match by a second or two with like 50% Charlies. But that also is maybe not the best thing to do, right?
Yeah. Right.
It's for sure not the best thing to do at a major, right?
Definitely not.
So
Because you
it's
lack that
very
control, right? Because you're not
exactly.
holding yourself, like you're not measuring yourself against an all alpha run,
Yep.
or, you know, a 90% alpha run, you're just like going, how fast can I do this? And
Yep.
it kind of throws you out into orbit. Like, you know, okay, well, you got out here, but now what do? It's not like a carefully charted path that you're taking. And it's like, oh, sometimes we got bumped off a little bit. No problem. Like, get right back on it. It's just kind of like boom, and a bomb goes off. And it's like, okay, well, here I am. Like, I just did this super fast. And you've got a shotgun spread on your targets.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
So for me, very similar to you with like stage planning, a lot of this is mental, right? We
Yes.
have a lot of the hard skill that we need, but the mental side of things is so important and it's so crucial in execution of these stages
Yeah.
because I have the ability to either run it faster than anyone, 50% Charlies, or run it clean. But either of those two options are probably not the best. So I have to find a middle ground in between and being able to exploit my strengths and run the stage in the way that it should be run and not the way I want to run it per se.
Mm.
So it's very difficult for me. I would say it's probably the hardest shooting based skill I've ever had to work on because self control, like man, it's probably the hardest
It's
thing
like
that.
shooting maturity.
Yes, exactly.
It's
Yep.
like, okay, I have to grow up now. I have to
Yep.
be a big
Because
boy.
when you unlock, which I'm nothing special, right? But like we've worked really hard
Yeah.
at our shooting, and when we unlock this level of shooting, it's very fun. It's very exciting. It's very thrilling, and you're just like, man, like I'm pretty good. This is fun. I'm just gonna like send it, and
Mm-hmm.
it takes a little bit of fun out of it when you have someone like Eric Graffel come up to you and be like, "That's stupid. Don't do that." Like,
Yeah.
no, it's not
Yeah.
good. It's
So for
like
a perfect example of that last stage or last match we shot, there was a stage had only 3 targets and each target required 6 shots. So it was like a bill drill stage, right? And
yeah.
I was like, oh word, right? And you know, you shot that shot that first, right? I think you shot that first. And so there was like a little bit of pressure on me to like shoot it faster, like do a better bill drill than you, like right off the rip. Um, and, uh, and so you shot one really close and then you shot one kind of far, like on the move. And then you transitioned and shot one really close again. And pretty much all I was thinking about was like, hey man, you're really good at bill drills. You're really fast. Like just go ahead and like just shred this. Right. And my time was great. My time was faster than yours. And but I think I dropped a delta, right? And if that delta had gone away, I think it was like 2 Charlie and a delta or something like that, or 4 Charlie and a delta. If I just taken the delta away completely, like I would have had you easily, right? But I
Mhm,
just had to. I was thinking about going fast, and I was not thinking about just the points collection. And you got me on that one, right? Because I think you were probably just a little bit more locked into match mode than I was on that stage, and like there it is. That's the difference. And we were
mhm,
close. And again, you could totally get away with that at a major or at a local match. I ended up doing a little bit better than you at that match, right? Just barely, right? But yeah, again, it's stuff that you can get away with when you're not as mature of a shooter, for sure.
yep,
So okay, that's
yep.
really good. What is the low hanging fruit for you right now? So like we talk about in class we talk about this in classes all the time. Identify the low hanging fruit. For most people, it is really understanding confirmation levels, transitions, and movement. Like those are kind of the biggest things that like are going to have the greatest return on investment if you start working them. What do you feel like is there for you right now?
Um, funny enough, it's, not drop stepping so much.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's like, that's kind of the only thing I can think of, right now.
How about
Um
steel?
Oh, yeah, and steel, yeah. So, actually, no, 3 things. So I'm gonna say 3 things. So, first one is, yeah, not drop stepping so much,
Okay.
staying lower, loading my legs a little bit more, and then, going 1 for 1 on steel. So, for
Hmm.
sure, like, by far, the my biggest weakness right now is going 1 for 1 on steel. This last match, my goal was like, "Yep, I'm gonna shoot every stage, go 1 for 1 on steel." That did not happen. Very definitely not. I had makeups on every single.
Last stage was pretty rough for you.
It was pretty bad. I think I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6. I had 6 makeups within all the steel. No, 7 actually. That stage had a lot of steel for what it's worth, and
6 and
it
12.
had a 25-yard plate
It
rack.
had about
So
10. It had about 10 steel. Yeah.
yeah, and there was a 25-yard plate rack. So for what it is.
Yeah.
Anyway,
But whatever. I
I
had one makeup only.
yeah, well, and I suck. So there's that. But then the third low hanging fruit is not splitting targets so fast. So for those of you who may not know, the only
White light
reason I
ND.
actually made GM is because I started shooting one of these.
Right. It's automatic. Well, I was gonna say it's automatic, but clearly not for me. But
It's
anyways,
automatic M, maybe, but
maybe.
semi-automatic GM, maybe. I don't know. But shooting this thing, I can split this thing pretty quick, right? Like I can split this pretty reliably in like the 13, 14, 15 area. However, after really starting to paying attention to how many points I'm dropping at matches, it was unbelievable how many 3, 4, 5 yard targets I was throwing a Charlie on.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's really weird. Like the group is maybe close, but like it's Alpha Charlie, right? Or maybe the group is big, right? And I'm just thinking, I'm like, man, I don't understand how that can be. I know my grip is locked in. But the thing is, when you're shooting splits that fast, you're gaining very little than if you were to shoot a little bit slower and be able to actually guarantee 2 alpha while still shooting predictively, right?
Yeah. So, like, for instance, like on a 6 hit factor stage, a Charlie is worth about a third of a second, right? Like 0.3
Correct.
seconds.
Yep.
So, essentially, if you can shoot a Charlie faster than 0.3 seconds, you are good to go. Like, you are going to be ahead on points. But let's say you shoot it at a 15, right? And you do Alpha Charlie, so you drop 2 points. But I'm not going to shoot it at a 30, right? Like I'm going to shoot it at a 17 or an 18, right? And there's actually a fairly big difference between a 15 and an 18 split, right?
Yep.
And so I'll go to Alpha with an 18 and you go Alpha Charlie with a 15, and now you're behind me on that target, on that one target, right? So yeah, just to kind of put it in, it's really nerdy math stuff, but just to give people some context.
Yeah, for sure. And it's so tempting, especially if you're a guy competing in limited optics with a sweet 2011 like Atlas. Like the temptation to throw 12 splits at a target is, it's hard, but you're not, I assure you, you're not gaining anything. And the best shooters in the world do not shoot 12 splits at targets. They can, but they don't, because
it's very rare.
Very rare, right?
Yeah.
Because what it's giving them is too much risk for so little reward, right? Because for the guys at the top, even one Charlie on a single stage could cost them the win, right?
Yep.
And we are understanding that, right? Paying attention to how Eric shoots, and all these guys at the top, like a single Charlie on a stage is concerning. It's like, oof, man, it's not good, right? Especially on the lower hit factor stages.
Yes.
So, my low hanging fruit, which I think I'm getting better at. I still haven't totally fixed it yet, but splitting targets no faster than 18s. Like there's no need. 18s or 20s are just fine. I could guarantee 2 alpha. I can still make the transition a level 1 confirmation and be good to go. Americans just have an infatuation with splits. I don't know what it is. It's because they're fun and they sound cool and they look cool, but it's really not, outside of bill drills. They're not super useful. They're you should be able to do them, but they're not that helpful at matches.
Agreed. Agreed. And maybe there's a couple spots here and there where it's like, okay, like having that tool on board is very useful.
Yep.
But I would say it's kind of the same as like having the leading exit on board, or having, a double drop step on board.
Yep.
Things like that. It's like, yeah, it's useful, but it's not the majority of it. Maybe you're gonna kind of buzz by a target really, really fast and it's very tight. And so you're gonna have your gun up and you're just gonna go "Bah!" like that as the target leaves. Okay, cool, you didn't have to slow down there. Maybe that, gets you something. Or, maybe it is only 3 to 5 yards away, but at a 7 yard target, technically you should be able to do the same thing. But now you're going to switch that off and go back to kind of, closer to reactive. So yeah, definitely very cool. Okay. So that was low hanging fruit. So, I had another question here. It's pretty much the same. What's a skill that's underdeveloped? I guess we can touch on that quickly. So you said before that there's lots of skills that you really think, um, there's still a lot of skill development that you need to do. So that's very interesting to me. Um, Most of the time when I think of grandmasters, the hard skills are all there. Like I don't really think of them a lot of times, which I'm sure I'm wrong, but I don't really think of them doing a lot of skill development a lot. Like I mostly just think of like grandmasters are working on their match performance, and how they're going to do it, like majors and stuff. So is there a skill or some skills that you feel like are underdeveloped for where you're at? Because obviously you made GM, but there's still a lot of, um, this skill disparity between you and, like Christian Seiler or something like that.
Right.
So what would you have there?
Yeah. I would say it's two things. Number one is shot calling. I've gotten really lazy with my shot calling in the last couple years.
Okay.
Um, I do it. I think every M and GM has some level of shot calling skill, obviously, because if you make it to that level, you've been shooting long enough. You're paying attention to what your dot is doing. You can see if your dot drops into a low delta or a mic most
Yeah.
of the time, right? But
Yep.
where my shot calling falls off is with steel, right? And also with shooting like tight Charlies. So
Hmm.
maybe at a 10-yard target, I may shoot that pretty aggressive. And I'm like, yep, that was 2 alpha, a little low, but I know it's 2 alpha. And I walk up and it's Alpha Charlie. It's like, man,
Mm.
it's not good. Like, once again, that's a Charlie. That's 2 points on the table for you or for the next guy, right? And
Yeah.
at a major, it's gonna kill me. So
Hmm.
shot calling is a hard skill that I definitely need to develop a little bit more. I used to be better at it, believe it or not.
Hmm.
I used to be really good at it. There was a point in time where I would go 1 for 1 on steel. It was a short period of time, but I was very confident because, yeah, I knew exactly where my dot was. So I just need to give that a little bit of attention, and I think that would be very helpful.
How do you plan on working on that? Because that's something that I think everybody needs to work on, myself included. A lot of times, like at a class or at a match, even I'll ask somebody like, how many Charlies did you shoot, right? And they're kind of like, oh, I don't know, I haven't seen the tablet yet.
Mhm.
Or I'll be like, how many Charlies did you shoot? And they're like looking at the target, like, I think I have one. I'm like, no, that's not what I was asking. Like I was asking like, how many Charlies did you call, right? And a lot of people, I think, maybe aren't even thinking on that level
Mhm.
yet. So what are you planning on doing to work on that?
So I'm planning on using some local matches to do that, and that is essentially to just think about it. Believe it or not, like I know that it's a skill that's kind of in the toolbox for me that I just haven't utilized in a long time because I'm not thinking about it. If I walk up to a stage, whether this be in practice or at a local, and I think, okay, I think to myself, pay extra attention to the dot without staring at the dot, but pay extra attention to what my dot is doing. um, I know that that alone will switch it on. And so what I need to do is I need to do that enough times to where my new baseline of paying attention to my dot and shot calling is now my new baseline, right? Like how much
Mhm.
I've been paying attention to it and focusing on it. Okay, I've brought my baseline up. I don't need to think about it anymore. It's back up to snuff.
Yep.
And I think that's why my steel has gotten so lazy, is because it's not because I am pushing into the gun or I'm not gripping the gun right. I think it's because I bring my eyes to maybe not a small enough spot on the steel, but maybe it is, and I bring my dot and I just think it's close enough. Smash the trigger. It's good to go. But really, in actuality, it wasn't. It was on the left edge of the steel. Like my dot wasn't there yet. And then, as you
Mm-hmm.
can also see me transition off the steel, come back. That's 100% a shot calling thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I see myself do that. I don't just have makeups on steel. I have transition makeups on steel, which is even worse. And it's just, to
Yeah.
me, it's a shot calling thing. So,
Okay.
yeah, I know I just need to give it a little bit more patience and pay more attention to what my dot is doing throughout the stage, and not necessarily honing in so much on like each array or each position,
Mm.
because I still need to be paying attention to what my dot is doing so that I can call that delta or that close Charlie on a 10-yard target, so that my 3 Charlie stage doesn't become a 4 Charlie stage or even a 5, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Okay. Cool. Anything else other than shot calling? You said there were
Um,
two. Maybe you forgot.
yeah, there was another thing.
No worries. If you
It lost.
if you think of it, you can throw it back
Yeah.
in. So something I heard from Tim Herron, which I think you and I should try sometime. And I don't think I've actually told you this yet. So Tim Herron and somebody else, one of his buddies, I can't remember who it is. They do a shot calling game at matches when they shoot it together. Have you heard? Did I tell you about
Mhm.
this?
Yeah.
So like they will shoot the stage, and before the RO even like starts scoring, like definitely before they start scoring, calling out hits, but definitely before you look at the tablet, they'll turn around. Like as soon as they unload and show clear and holster their gun, they'll turn around and tell their buddy, 3 Charlies, right?
Yep.
And if they're wrong, it's, I don't know, it's like a money thing, like they have to put some money in the pot or something like that, or something like that, and the other guy wins the pot at the end of the day, whoever had called the most stages correctly, right?
Mhm.
And so that's kind of an interesting thing that I think you and I should try sometime. Make it a little interesting, right? Like $5 on the stage, or $10 on the stage to make it hurt a little bit,
Mhm.
and see if we could do that, because we already try to do that, but we're wrong a lot,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Yep.
like I'll come off and I'll be 1 Charlie off,
Mhm.
like like 3 Charlies, and then they show up and it's like, oh, 4 Charlies, or 5 Charlies. It's like, oh, all right,
Yeah.
and it doesn't seem like a big deal. And a lot of times the other people in our squad are just kind of like, bro, what's the big deal? But it is a big deal if
Mhm.
if you only called 3 Charlies and you're only planning on shooting 3 Charlies, and then you allowed 5 to slip by. So anyways, we'll have to try that
Yep.
out. Okay.
Oh, the other
Yeah.
thing, I remembered it. The
All
other
right.
thing, the other hard skill that I need to develop is um, more confidence shooting at distance, like farther
Okay.
than 25 yards. So like
Yes.
30, 35, 40-yard targets, even 50-yard targets.
Yes.
I never shoot past 25, admittedly. Um, Accuracy, anyone that's followed me for any length of time or has trained with me for any length of time will know that accuracy has always been a weak point of mine. So shooting past 25 has just always scared me. Like when the Dick and Drill came out, I was like, no way. Not gonna happen. And I did it, and I got like 8 Charlie, 2 Alpha or something like that. So yeah, especially watching or looking at some of the stages at nationals, even at the Wisconsin sectional, there was a stage that had some 30, 32-yard targets, and I
Yep.
could tell, and they were open targets. There was 2 partials, I think, but mostly open targets, and I could see myself shooting like .5 splits, and it's like, once again, I don't want to get too deep into splits, but I think it's more so a confidence thing. I
Mm-hmm.
see my dot, bounce, come back down, and it's a still dot, but I'm just like, is it good? Is it not good? Is my trigger, like, am I prepping my trigger? Does everything feel good? I second guess myself a lot on farther targets, like 35, 40-yard targets. So that's other like a hard skill thing, which I don't think would take much to get good at, but it
No,
is
that's easy.
something.
That's super easy. You just have to set up the target and shoot them.
Yeah,
Um,
just it's easy. Just hit 2 alpha on
it's easy.
50-yard targets. It's easy.
It's way easier than learning how to call your shots. I'll say that. Okay, very good. So let's breeze through the last couple here, and then we'll start wrapping up. So what? Well, all right. We'll do this one first. So should you use matches as practice?
Yes.
Okay, explain, because people feel differently about this. Sometimes they say, don't use by matches. We're saying local matches. So should you use local matches as practice for getting better, or should you approach each one like it is, nationals?
Yeah, so I take it back. It's not a blatant yes. I think it depends.
Okay.
I think at some point they should be used as practice.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
At
So
what point?
if I would say once again, I don't like to segregate certain things to people based on their classification, but it's kind of a thing, right? I would say if you're A class or below, probably don't use matches as practice because you probably have some hard skill development to do yet. Like you probably have some serious hard skill like grip,
Hmm.
shot calling, movement. Like there's probably some things that you probably need to work out in practice, in training that you can rep out over and over and over to get some tangible, measurable results, right? The only thing other than that that you could use for practice is like stage planning, right? But even stage planning, you don't need to practice at matches. However, when you reach, I would say M class or GM, which especially GM, but once you get to M class or above, I think matches can very much so become practice, just because the I think being able to test certain things under pressure, and not test things, but actually train certain things under pressure, in an environment that you have not created is really valuable. Because
Mm.
at our level, right, we don't need a super sterile environment to like try something, right? Like matches don't scare us anymore. We're not nervous about them anymore. We're not like worried about safety. We're not necessarily even worried about stage planning at
Hmm.
locals. And so all of those stressors, all of those factors are out of the way. Whereas as an A class or below, like you may still be affected by those things, right? So like you
Hmm.
may walk out to a stage and be like, okay, woof, like no one talked to me for 5 minutes because I'm going to use all my 5 minutes to stage plan here because I'm a little overwhelmed, right?
Hmm.
Uh, or maybe you're just a little nervous. Maybe your knees are shaking a little bit, right? Match jitters happens to all of us. You just don't really have that kind of stuff when you're in M class or GM, right? And so I think being able to try certain things under the pressure of a match, I think is really good. Now,
So give me an
I,
example of something that you would like be trying, because it's not, you're not out there going, or maybe you are. Like, are you going out there and being like, can I have the fastest raw time on every stage? Or are you looking at it like, oh man, like here's an array where I would normally not move, but I am going to try it. And it's just kind of like a smaller thing.
yep.
Like what kind of practice are you talking about?
Yeah, so for me, I use matches as practice a lot because there was a period of time where I just didn't have very much ammo and I did not feel like my practice was getting properly informed in my own time. And I felt like I was running dry of things to practice and I wasn't being accountable to myself. I'm like, man, I almost can't trust myself at the range
Hmm.
alone.
Yep.
I'm sure other people have felt that way. You walk up and you do a drill and you're like, I almost can't trust myself because I feel like I did good, but is it good though? But when you walk up to a match, after you shoot a stage, like how you feel about it. Every single time you're like, oh yeah, that was trash. Or you know what? That felt really good.
Right.
Um, so I personally used matches a ton for practice. Just to name a couple things. I've done all the things you mentioned. So there's been matches where I said, you know what, my goal for this match is to edge out every single person by at least 2 seconds on every stage. Like so, I'm going to push, 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 push to have the fastest raw time in the match by a lot. And I did that, and I'm like, okay, great, that worked out. And the interesting thing is that I didn't sacrifice that many points. Interesting. I wonder if I just unlocked a new level of speed. And
Hmm.
then I shot at the next match doing the same thing, and then I dropped 2 no shoots, and I'm like, okay, all right, yep, pushing a little too much. I need to find a medium here. Um, Another thing I've tried is shooting as many targets on the move as I can, even partials, right?
Hmm.
Where I walk into this local match and I'm like, you know what? I don't care how much it scares me. I'm going to force myself to move on these partials. I don't care if I throw no shoots or mics. I'm going to use that and take very accurate mental notes or even physical notes on what happens on each stage. Make sure to
Hmm.
record each stage, all that good stuff. Um, Another thing I've tried is moving on steel on every position I can. I've tried that before at matches, and then also shooting partials as aggressive as I can. Right, all of
Hmm.
those things I have absolutely practiced at matches. Now, that's not to say that I practice them exclusively at matches, But when you practice something at a match, it's different. It's just a different environment, right? You
Yeah,
have a
because
little bit
the
of pressure
yeah,
because you don't want to fail, right? Even as an
right,
M class guy, like you don't want to
right,
throw two no shoots on a stage. So like there's
right.
just as much pressure there, just enough pressure to like put you on your edge. But like at the same time, it's a local practicing some things, figuring some stuff out. At the end of the day, no one really cares.
If you don't play
So
super well or whatever, it's not a big deal.
yep,
Nobody's gonna remember whatever.
yep, yeah. So I think
Mhm.
just the blend of those things can really help.
Okay,
Um, yeah,
cool. I like it. All right. Last question, kind of from me, and then we'll maybe look at a couple listener submitted questions here. But what advice would you give yourself 2 years ago? So 2 years ago, it was 2022. Let's just say right when you made M. Um, so a little over 2 years ago. What
yeah.
advice would you give yourself if you could go back and talk to that Justin?
Um, I would say go buy an MMP sooner.
Listen to your friend Brennan.
Yep. Just buy an MMP sooner because they would have made everything easier. Um, throw an Apex in it, be done. I would
Buy
say
an SRO.
yes, exactly. Don't shoot the trash 509. Um, um, yeah, so I would say make my practice way harder, way
Okay.
harder.
All right.
Mentally, longer drills, longer stages, more difficult targets, accuracy heavy targets. 100% that is something I should have been doing 2 years ago, and I believe that would have helped me a lot.
Mhm.
Because I mean, we've had the same thing happen to us when you shoot a match or you go to a practice session and you see the same thing happening over and over. You mic on every stage, or you hit a no shoot on every stage, or you make a mental fart on each stage, whatever. It leaves a very long lasting impression in your brain. You're like, I suck so bad at this thing. I'm going to work on this, right? And if we would have made or if I would have made my practice as hard as I make it today, I would be hitting no shoots and throwing mics all over the place. And it would really have informed my training back then. And it would have really made myself more honest. Or I would
Yeah.
have made me more honest with myself.
So let's talk about that really quick because I think it's very interesting. And
Yeah.
whatever, this is just going to be a long episode, so people can deal with it. But I think so when we started shooting together back when I worked at Vortex, you would come and we would shoot quite a bit. And there was a time I remember where we would shoot stuff and you would be throwing more Charlies than you were happy with, or more points than you were happy with. And I would be able to shoot it clean, like on demand. And you were like, and I'd be like, all right, Justin, just shoot this again. Just do all alphas and seriously, like, don't worry about the time. Just shoot all alphas. And you'd be like, all right. And you would shoot two Charlies or more sometimes. And I was like, bro, I thought I thought you said we were gonna, do this all alphas on this one. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I know. And you got I think there got to be a point where, this is maybe weeks or months of this, and you just got really frustrated about the inability to shoot clean, right? And so that really became a focus for you for quite some time, I think, kind of on your own, of like,
Mhm.
dude, I just have to figure out how to like freaking shoot better. And like we were even doing stuff like walk back drills where we'd shoot groups, and it was like, I would get you like every time. And now when we do that, we're very even. So what
Mhm.
was like, you know, what was like the change there? Like, I think that's a good example of a hard skill that you had to, really work on and change, but it took you a really long time. And you probably wish you could have, started that way back in 2021 instead of, late 2022 or 2023 even.
Mhm. Yeah, 100%. It's because so the number one reason it took so long is because I was seeing success
Yes.
at my local matches because of my speed. So
Yep.
in my mind, I
There you go.
justified my lack of accuracy by the um, the difference in speed, essentially.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
in my mind, I'm thinking, hey, Because even back then, like I was starting to win matches, and I'm like,
Yep.
Brennan, you're right. Like I should be more accurate, but I'm winning matches because my mindset back then was like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you're winning matches. You must be doing something right, which
Yeah.
is not wrong. But like if you have that mentality with local matches, it's not totally accurate. And so I lied to myself for a long time. And I remember it was a specific night when we were shooting together and we were shooting, I don't remember what it was. It might have been the Billy Drill standards. Um, I don't remember, but I remember leaving that night probably the most frustrated I've ever been in my shooting life. I was literally ready to just like burn my Glock. Um, I hope ATF doesn't hear this, but like I was ready to just like be done and be like, you know what? I'm taking up stamp collecting. I've wanted to do that since I was a kid, anyways, blah, blah, blah. I was so frustrated and I didn't touch my gun for probably 3 weeks after that night. And I said, okay, you know what? Stop moping. Time to get to work. What do I need to do? So the next 6 to 8 months, I did not shoot a target closer than 15 yards.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter if it was a partial, open, doesn't matter. 15 yards was my minimum distance. So I shot 15, 25-yard bill drills. I shot accelerators, but with the closest target being 15 yards. And I would essentially just do like target, 25-yard target, or I would do like 15, 20, 25. And that was so beneficial to me because
Hmm.
I mean, you do something long enough, you do practice something hard enough, you're going to get good at it. Well, that's what accuracy was for me. Um, but the reason it took me so long to finally get to that, and yes, it did take me like 6 months to finally get to that, and maybe that's just a lack of patience, right? Like, and just my personality. But it took me so long to finally get to that point in my practice because I was lying to myself. Hey, I'm winning local matches. I'm super, super fast. Actually, doesn't really matter. But then I go shoot a major like Area 5, and some GM like Ben Suzuki or Scott Rader is beating my time and shooting, 10 more points on each stage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, once again, going back to making my practice harder, prioritizing accuracy and points while still maintaining speed is something I would have focused on a lot more.
Yeah. And then that has come into play in a whole new level for you, like this year, like this
Yep.
calendar year, 2024. Understanding why it's so important to shoot accurately,
Yep.
which is cool. And I think I had started on that path a little bit earlier than you. I trained with Eric the year before.
Mhm.
And you weren't able to come to that class. And I was, I was like, wow, like this is really important. I think it was starting to click with me. And for you, it was like, bro, like no,
Yeah.
like it's too much, right? And then you trained with Eric, and it was kind of like, oh, okay, like now I see why it's so important, and so yeah, it's cool to see that to be a focus. Very good. So any other piece of advice you give yourself? So you said, um, start making your practices more difficult, longer and more difficult targets, things like that. Anything else?
Um, I would say 2 years ago, I would say focus less on like videos, like making content. I was still running my
Hmm.
company back then, so it's not quite fair, but even still, like I was always thinking about like, oh hey, I'm gonna go shoot a practice session. I only have like 200 rounds, but hey, I might as well make some content out of it. And then next thing you know, like that just throws everything off.
Yep.
So that's another thing.
Yep.
It'd be like, you know what? Physically leave your phone in the car and just go shoot
Yeah.
because like it's distracting. It is very distracting.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, that's all the questions I had. I think this is really good talk. I think people, regardless of where you're at in your skill level, are going to be able to get something out of this from your journey. And obviously, it's been super cool for me to watch the progression. Having known you pretty much for as long as you've been shooting matches, we've been doing it for the exact same amount of time, which is super cool. Like give or take a couple weeks, I think. And very excited to see where you're going to go, and just to see the skill level overall and the consistency that you've kind of locked into has been legit. Let's get to some listener questions. So let's see. I might not do all of these here. Let's do this one about dry fire. So somebody said, how often should I dry fire, and is there such a thing as dry firing too much?
There's definitely a thing as dry firing too much, in my opinion.
Okay.
I've had other people say otherwise. That's totally fine. But for me
Okay.
personally, um, some of the best shooting I've ever done was me not touching my gun for like a week or two
Mm,
beforehand.
okay.
Overtraining is a thing. It's a thing in professional sports, like professional athletes talk about overtraining. Um, I also think it has a lot to do with how you're dry firing too.
Mm-hmm.
If you're one of those guys that dry fires every day for like 2 years, like that's awesome. But like I'm pretty convinced that your dry fire's not doing that much for you and that it's not hard enough, right? Because if you dry fired or practice that hard, like you should probably be pretty close to being a GM or a really high level M, right? If your dry fire is correct, in my opinion.
Hmm.
And so, um, what was the first part of the question? Is what should it
How
look
often
like,
should
or
I dry fire? And then can I dry fire too much?
yeah. So I mean, my dry fire, I'm trying to dry fire a couple times a week.
Mm-hmm.
Got a
Is
couple
that different?
kids.
Is that
It's hard to
different
do that.
from previously? I mean, I think you used to dry fire more.
Oh yeah, for sure. So
Yeah. So do you think
I
that
would
changes
say
as a skill level gets higher? Do you think the dry fire is maybe not as important, or because everybody feels very differently about this, which is very interesting.
yeah. Yeah, so I dry fire. You and me were the dry fire kings back in the day.
Yes, we were.
I would dry fire at least an hour a day, and
Yeah,
I'm
same.
not even exaggerating.
Yeah,
Sometimes 2 hours.
yeah.
Like my
Probably three,
wife,
three to three, 3 days a week at least a 2 hour session.
yeah,
Yeah.
man, my wife, God bless her soul.
Hmm,
I don't even know what she did with those hours of her life
hmm.
while I was dry
Both
firing. Just
both of our wives have PTSD when they hear a timer. They're like, "Ugh."
yes,
Yep.
100%. And that
Yep.
was back when I used the packed trash
Oh,
timers that are
dude,
you can't
they're
even
so
adjust the
loud.
volume level. Oh,
You're the worst. You're the worst husband.
this is the worst.
So,
Um,
but at
yeah,
that lower level, do you think there's a benefit to just dry firing the mechanics to the point where they are perfect?
yeah. I
Um,
think it's so hard for me not to chuckle because
yeah,
we were so good at mechanics back then,
so
way
good.
better than we are now.
I don't
And
know,
yet we
way
couldn't.
better. I don't know about way better.
I was way better than I am now.
I don't
I
know.
admit it, 100%. And yet I shot like
Yeah,
trash back then, you
yeah.
know?
But like I've been able to do like a .6 draw for a long time,
Yeah, well,
or like a sub-second reload for a long time. But like
yeah.
clearly like that's not been what's helping me in matches like at all.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah, so I do think dry firing, in the beginning a lot is really helpful. It's like reaching, I don't play video games very much, but it's like reaching level 10 in a video game. It's always super easy to reach that level 10. And then like level 20, level 30 is like very incremental, right? I think that's the
Hmm.
same way shooting goes, where you can achieve a B class level of proficiency really, really fast, like
Yeah.
within months, easily.
Yeah. Right.
And I think dry firing, getting really, really intimate with your gun, that sounded weird, but getting really used to your gun, being able
Yeah.
to fondle, I mean, pull the trigger,
Oh,
um, and just understand exactly where your trigger breaks, where your walls are, how your grip feels, what your dot looks like, all that good stuff. So I think there's a lot of benefit in that. But once you get to a certain level, and I can't say exactly what that level is. That's why we say classes, because it's a lot easier to just say a class versus, because everyone's different, right? So this
yeah.
is not absolute, but when you reach, let's just say an M class level, I believe that your dry fire needs to be like very, very structured to what you need to work on, right? So for me, trigger control at speed was a great thing. So for those of you who may not know that, essentially trigger control at speed is where you have your dot on target and you have a two-handed grip solidified and you have your finger just touching the trigger, and then on the beat you smash the trigger as hard as you can, as quickly and as hard as you can, and you should, in theory, with a good enough grip, not see any movement in your dot. Okay, that's
Hmm?
what success would look like with that drill. I struggled with that for a long time, which goes to show, back then when I was shooting, I would shoot and I'd pull the trigger and then press down, right? That was how I managed recoil. And that was very detrimental to me because when I would do trigger control at speed and dry fire, I would do that. I would go click, and it was always natural to me to just do click. And so that's why back then I always prepped. Every single shot I would prep if I could, right? Um, so then I worked on my grip for a long time because I realized that that was kind of wrong. And so yeah, so that's kind of what I worked on. And then, once your mechanics and everything are figured out at that point, for me, a lot of it is like transitions, movement, and like just mental acuity or mental
Hmm.
conditioning, strength conditioning. So
Yep.
doing very complicated, very long, complicated stages, right? So you could do designated target, right, with 6 targets, and you do designated target with every single one with 3 reloads in between. Like, that's
Hmm.
very taxing on your mind. It takes a
Yep.
lot to focus on that
Yep.
throughout the entire string and be very accountable to your grip and everything like that. So,
Yep.
um, yeah, so for me personally, like, I probably could dry fire every day and get a lot of value out of it. I just don't. So I found that like 2 or 3 times a week of dedicated 10 to 20 minute dry fire is very helpful for me. And then typically leading up to a match, I try not to dry fire. I try to
Hmm.
just give myself a break, at least a couple days. It may not be a week or two, but at least a couple days to just give my mind like a refresh. Just say,
Hmm.
okay, you know what? I know that I've cemented in whatever hard skills I have. I'm not gonna lose any skill from now and Thursday, right? Like,
Yep. Right.
I just have to trust what I have.
Yep.
And that has worked out very well for me. It's been very successful. It's like a formula I have. At least 3 days, I don't touch my gun.
Hmm.
Um, so anyways, that's a very long-winded answer to that, but
Cool.
yeah.
No, I like it. I like it. Um, Another one was, what does a typical range day look like? I think we kind of already covered some of that kind of in passing, so we'll skip that, and that might be something we'll do. In addition, keep a lookout, because I think maybe some of the next videos you and I will do and put on the channel, as I call them like normal YouTube videos, not podcast form. Will probably be some range sessions, so keep an
Yes.
eye out for that. What is the difference between being a good instructor and a good shooter? Because you've kind of jumped into the instruction game. You used to instruct a little bit for your own company, but obviously you've done some with Gateway as well. So what's the big difference there, right? Are all GMs good teachers? Why are not more instructors GMs? That type of thing.
Yeah, so yeah, I've had an interesting journey with teaching and shooting. So when I started teaching back in like 2020-ish, just locally for some people that asked. And once again, back then, I'm a B class shooter. I really didn't feel like I had any business teaching people, right? And then 2021 rolls around, started my own training company. Um, got some steam the first year just locally, never traveled for classes or anything like that, did a lot of one-on-one. But I was met with this um kind of roadblock in my mind of like, hey, like, you should at least be an M class shooter before you start teaching people. And that was my mindset. I was like, you need. And so I kind of did it reluctantly just because I had a lot of local people asking me to do it. And it was an opportunity for me to make some money so I could pay for ammo. That was a huge reason why I did it too.
Sure.
I was like, hey, if I can make some money teaching people so that I can fund my ammo to go shoot more matches, cool. Um, but what's interesting is that what I have found in my journey is that achieving a high level of skill, you have a very deep and thorough understanding on how you got there. No questions asked, right? However, how you got there may be very different than how I get there, or how you may get there, or how Susan may get there, right? And you also have to understand what is the goal of the people you are teaching, right? And so, admittedly, 95% of the students I ever taught had touched a gun once, twice, maybe
Yep.
never.
Yep.
And so, I personally believe that um, just as a baseline, like, you should probably be a B class level shooter or higher before you teach people anything, because
Yeah.
like you can't be 1 or 2 steps ahead of what you're teaching. Like, you need to be several steps ahead of what you're teaching so that you have a deep and thorough understanding of what it
Yeah.
is that you're teaching, right?
Especially when you're
Um,
teaching the fundamentals. in my
Yes.
opinion. Like
Yes.
that's
Exactly.
that's really where, like, man, you need to have mastered that, really done a deep dive, really explored, all different sides of that coin, spent 6 to 9 months, on a certain technique, determining, if it's good or what, all that stuff. So yeah, especially
Mhm.
when it comes to the fundamental level, like, man, you really need to be way beyond that.
Yes, for sure. But
Right.
if you're teaching like local, like legal classes and you're essentially just teaching people like how to be safe, like safety, loading and unloading, it
Hmm.
doesn't take a whole lot of skill, right? But being a B
Yep.
class level shooter, like you know how to unload and show clear, all that kind of stuff, and you can teach that, great. However, once you start getting into the fundamentals, like you were just saying, grip sights trigger, I think this is where a lot of people go wrong, just in my opinion, is where, yeah, how much exploration have you done outside of what you do, right?
Yeah.
Everyone is going to find that one thing that works for them. Okay, great. I have different hands than you. I have different body
Hmm.
structure. I process things differently than you. And we both know that there's not one way to do things
Hmm.
typically. Like for almost anything shooting related, there are very, very, very few things that you really should only do one way, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have not explored those things and really discussed those things thoroughly with someone, or I guess explored in your own time.
Yep.
Um, I don't think that it's a good idea for you to teach, in my opinion. And the reason I say this because that's something that I did. I thought that I understood a lot about teaching, a lot about shooting, simply because I was an A class level shooter. So I'm like, okay, I've gotten to this point.
Hmm.
I can absolutely teach you what I've done, and you should see the same results or the same amount of success. And that may be true for 25% of your students,
Yeah.
maybe 40%. But what
Yeah.
about the other 50 or 60, right?
Yeah.
They may not do that the same way. And so
Well, and
to
they're going to make
understand,
progress. Like, they're going to make progress, but it might not be the whole solution for them all the way up. Like,
mhm,
during that session, they're probably going to see improvement,
yep,
right? Because whatever you do is better than what they do, but that might not be the right path to set them on completely.
yep,
Yeah.
exactly. Because at the end of the day, if we're trying to execute a principle of how we want our dot to behave, and you
Yep.
understand 5 different techniques that will achieve that, I think that's a pretty high level of instruction that you have achieved if you can um, relay that kind of information, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Versus, hey, put your hand here, put your other hand here, squeeze here, boom. All right, everyone on the line, send it, right?
Yeah.
And so I know like there's a bit of a trend now of instructors in the training world going to principle based shooting, which I think is awesome. I know you feel the exact same way. We've had a lot of conversations about this, but
Hmm.
I think for a long time I was very technique based shooting, 100%.
Yeah.
Hey, do what I do, and I saw results, of course. But it wasn't until I would say the last year, maybe year and a half, where you and I started having some really, really deep conversations about different things that I'd never really thought of, that were solely principle based and not technique based. And so that was really eye opening to me. And I'm very grateful to you and our conversations and training together for that, because that definitely has made me a better instructor, because I look at something
Hmm.
and say, okay, what do we want to accomplish? What does success look like? What are some ways to achieve that? This is how I
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
Explore, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I'll say it. I'm not afraid. So, like, if you are an instructor and you just teach people the way you do it, and you're like, maybe it's not, maybe this isn't the best way, but it's how I do it, and so, like, I'm just gonna teach you guys how I do it, and you guys can decide if that's good for you or not. Like, if that's your whole teaching strategy, that's crap,
yeah,
right? Like a monkey can, you could teach a monkey to do what you do, right? Like
right.
like monkey see, monkey do, right? Like, no, grab it like this. No, do it like this. No, do it like, and eventually they're like, oh, okay. And they figure it out and they copy you, right? That does not
Mhm.
mean that they can do it at your level, or that it's going to set them up for success as they explore on their own. So you have to teach them what is the goal here, and then give them some ways to get started. But yeah, the whole technique based training stuff, man, like, it's a good way to get people to improve fast, like, I'm gonna make you put your grip here. And you're probably going to definitely see better results than whatever, messed up grip you had before. But that's definitely, there's definitely more ways to skin the cat. And by pigeonholing people into the corner like that, ugh, man, I
Yep.
don't think it's the way. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
anyways.
And I think that just because you're a GM, like you also, so aside from all of that, right? Like having a really deep understanding of the principles of the fundamentals, I believe you can absolutely achieve GM and not know those things. And if you're
Mm,
not an
I
instructor,
agree.
who cares? Like I hate to say it, who cares? As long as you can perform, it doesn't matter. Because if you're not teaching
Hmm.
people how to shoot, who cares if you don't understand? As long as you
Exactly.
can perform and you know how to improve yourself, awesome. Good for you. Go for it.
Yes.
But instructors, and I've heard Billy talk about this, instructors, it's weird. You have to force yourself to do things that you don't like for the sake of exploration. And from like a competitor standpoint, it makes no sense because you may be
Correct.
going backward in
It's a
order to
waste of
gain
time.
understanding of something that you may never use.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But it's necessary if you want to be a good instructor and a good coach.
Yes.
And so
But
yeah.
you might also surprise yourself and find there's some things that like, oh, like that's definitely, different. Like I think you've changed a few techniques about how you shoot.
Mhm.
And you were shooting just fine before. And it probably would not have been a huge deal, but maybe you caught them a little bit earlier on by way of thinking about instructing versus just thinking about shooting and, match
Yep.
results. So
Yep.
um
Exactly.
it's a
Yep.
worthwhile journey to go on and to seek out instruction and to listen to what other instructors have to say about stuff and just become a more well-rounded, have a deeper body of knowledge in that space, and then make the decision for yourself. Use all that
Yep.
knowledge and apply it and decide what you want to keep, what you don't.
Mhm.
But keeping an open mind, I think, is really good.
Yeah. And to anyone listening to this, like to that, like it's vetting instructors is a hard thing. That's a podcast in and of itself, but be wary of someone that just says they're a GM because just being a GM does not mean that they're going to give you a really high quality level of instruction. Um,
Yes,
it's a great stepping point. Like it's a great thing. It means they've achieved a level of performance that almost no one else will achieve. But don't just assume that you're going to go into that and get a lot out of it because you may not. Um, and then on the flip side, if you're a B class shooter and you have the same level of understanding that we do about teaching, but you can't perform and you can't execute what you're teaching to a high level, you also probably shouldn't be teaching because
I
how
totally
do
agree.
I know that what you're teaching, let's just say in 2 years from now or 5 years from now, is still current if you are not actively testing those things under some form of pressure? Right. We talk about this in our USPSA series, testing yourself under some form of pressure um, to prove or to
Hmm.
proof what it is we're doing in our training and
Hmm.
teaching, to prove that it works under pressure because we're not going to go get in gunfights, right? And so competition is the only way that we can pressure test those things. And so also be wary if you have someone that either doesn't shoot competitively or doesn't or refuses to or is a C class shooter that claims, yeah, I'm not going to go there, but
No, yeah,
um,
I'll go there. I mean, like 100%. It's easy to see like, hey, look, this guy can't teach. Like that's super easy. Like he gets up and he's not presenting information well. His blocks don't make sense. The way the curriculum is structured doesn't make sense. It's very easy to see like, okay, this guy's not a great teacher, right?
mhm,
Even if he's a great shooter. Okay. And there's multiple examples of that. But also pay attention to the end of the class. Like if you run some sort of final drill or some sort of stage or something like that, and the instructor shoots it and does not share his score, right? Like just quietly like hides it or whatever, or like pastes it up really fast so you can't see the scores and is not accountable to the students as well. Like, look, guys, that is not the instructor showing off. That is the instructor putting his money where his mouth is.
yep,
And you should 100% pay attention to that and watch him and film that and be like, that should be like, okay, I'm going to take notes. This is how it works, right? And obviously people are going to have some bad days. Like I've definitely had bad days, bad demos, whatever it is, right? But at the same time, I would not ever be afraid to have any of my students who've ever trained with me walk up to me and be like, hey man, let's shoot this together, right? And like see what you've got. And I'm always willing to put that up. And I've definitely worked with some people in the past, or taking classes with people in the past where that is not the case. And they shoot it, and man, there's guys in the class who just beat their socks off, and you watch that student shoot, and maybe he's not even applying most of the stuff from class because it's so brand new, right? And he's just kind of shooting at his current skill level. And then you see the instructor shoot who's teaching you how to do all these things, and he's also not doing the things that he was teaching, and he's getting beat by students or something else. Like that's really embarrassing for them. And you probably should be seeking training elsewhere, to be perfectly honest. So 100%. Anyways, lots of spicy takes tonight. So, okay, very good. Well, I think that's about all I've got. Unless you have anything else, we'll go ahead and wrap this up.
Send it.
All right, man. Well, there you have it, folks. Thank you for listening to the Gateway Defense podcast. Again, I'm so sorry it's been so long since we've put out a podcast episode. Justin recently added a new member to his family, a little baby boy, which is great. So he's been kind of, out of the filming and content game for a while. I've been traveling a bunch, so we're just trying to figure out some new schedules with filming and stuff. But we are going to be bringing back the regular YouTube videos as often as we can. And what I really want to try to do is bring back these podcast episodes really, really often, even if it's not always in our own studios or whatever. Maybe I'm on the road. Maybe we just kind of do an iPhone, filming, whatever. So we'll figure it out. We'll start bringing this content to you because I think these discussions are really valuable for you guys. And you guys give us a lot of good feedback that you like the podcast and you miss it. So again, I'm going to try to do a better job of making sure we push these out. If you've made it this far, we really appreciate you listening. We really appreciate you guys sharing these episodes, especially. That really helps us out quite a bit, gets the good word out there. Again, we think these conversations are something that are worth recording and listening to. So anytime you share the content that you're enjoying, that helps us out quite a bit. It is admittedly very hard to have motivation to do free content a lot and high quality free content. And so when you guys are sharing that around and we're able to pick up some subs and we're getting feedback and comments and you guys are interacting with our content, that helps us out so much. It's really kind of unbelievable how helpful that is and what a morale boost that is. So if you're looking for ways to support us, obviously subscribe to the YouTube channel. That helps us out quite a bit. And it's always fun to see the channel grow. The best way to support us is to get on our website, gateway-defense.com, buy some merch, but mostly sign up to take a class with us and to train with us. So we are teaching classes all over the country. Our next class is going to be in North Carolina. That one probably be too late to sign up for by the time this gets out. But the one after that, we're going to come to California again, to San Jose. We're going to be out there with our buddy Kyle Manzano, teaching a class in San Jose. The month after that, I believe we might be bringing something back to Wisconsin, the home state. And then we're going to be in Florida. We're going to be in Texas. We're going to be out in Nevada, and we're going to be out in California again. So we're going to be all over. And if you want to host us for a class next year, especially, we are booking up classes for 2025. So if you'd like to bring us out and you want to host us, it's a great way to get a free class. You guys can find all the information about hosting on the website under the hosting tab. Basically, you're just going to coordinate range access and come up with a few guys who are interested, kind of a core group of guys who are interested in training, and then you get a free spot in the class in exchange for kind of doing some of that legwork. And so we'd love to meet you. We'd love to come out to your area, and if that's something you're interested in, shoot me an email, shoot me a DM, and we will get talking about that and try to get something on the schedule right away. I think that's about all we've got for you. Be sure to make sure you're following us on social media. Make sure you're following Justin. He's started to put out some really good Instagram content lately, and obviously he is now a GrandMaster. So there's another GrandMaster that you can be following and watching and learning from. And I think that's about it. Until we see you guys next time, keep practicing shooting, and we will see you on the range.